On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our season preview series. Today, we're talking about Nick Paul.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I just want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to Locked On Lightning wherever you find podcasts available in audio form, and also subscribe to our channel over on YouTube. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our preseason player previews. And today we are talking about Nick Paul. We're taking a look at his season. What kind of season do we expect out of him? We kind of reflect back on the last couple of years, not only his time with the Lightning, but as well as his time up in Ottawa. We talk about the growth there with him as well. And like I said, this is a continuation of our player previews. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and check back on our last one where we spoke about Nikita Kucherov. A lot of cool things were spoken about there. What kind of season Kucherov could have this year at this point in his career. Is there any more room for growth? So you definitely don't want to miss out on that one, as we will be doing all of the players on this Lightning team as we get ever closer to the upcoming 2023-24 season. So just to review with Nick Paul, his last year with the Tampa Bay Lightning, 80 games played, 17 goals, 32 points with a plus minus of 11. And 4 of those goals I might have to mention are game winners. So definitely had a big effect on this Tampa Bay Lightning team as they got back to the playoffs. And unfortunately, we're unable to get another playoff run. But I think that, like we have discussed on past episodes, as well as right after the conclusion of that series against Toronto, I think that that is definitely something that is going to benefit this team coming into this season. Not only does it help the players that have been on this team for quite some time kind of re-energize, but also allow players like Nick Paul, who has only been on this team for really only 100 games, has only played 100 games with Tampa Bay Lightning, as we all know, was traded at the deadline during the 21-22 season, midway through, really made an effect there, really has improved, I believe, since then. I think it gives him a chance to kind of take a step back, because it can be, I could only imagine, somewhat of a whirlwind where you're going from regular season to playoffs, and then you only have a short amount of time compared to other players in the league who are on teams that have early playoff exits or who didn't play in the playoffs at all. It can feel like in the blink of an eye, you only have a couple of months off, and bam, you're back in preseason in training camp. So a guy like Nick Paul, who is definitely going to be a big piece in this Tampa Bay Lightning success. I think that the offseason is really something that I think that, as much as it's unfortunate that the Lightning weren't able to really get deeper into the playoffs, a guy like that, I think it's really going to help him a lot, really kind of further examine what he needs to work on in the offseason. So just looking at Nick Paul's career as a whole kind of gets you a sense of what kind of player he is. He's been in the league since 15-16, and very interesting player, to say the least. He's kind of a player where at this point in his career, he's 27 years old. He's played 9 years in the league, really 8. This will be his 9th season. I'm very curious to see what kind of player he is. It's one of those things where, and we could talk about this with a lot of players on this Lightning team in terms of they could do a lot of things very well, which is great. But as we've spoken about on this podcast multiple times with multiple players, especially when the Lightning are struggling, um, it's not the worst thing in the world to have a lot of players that could do a lot of different things. But as was the case at certain points, especially early on in that Maple Leaf series, you didn't have guys scoring. You didn't have guys really not only not scoring, but not being able to do it in key moments. And Nick Paul is a player that we have seen in the very brief time that he has played with the Tampa Bay Lightning where he could do a lot of things well. As you've seen in his brief time with Tampa Bay Lightning, 100 games played, 22 goals, 46 points. His plus minus is at a 15, which is great for a guy who's definitely going to be the anchor of that third line forward. And my thing is with him, other than the fact that he could do that pretty well, scoring wise, as well as he's one of the best players on this team in terms of face-off percentage. I'm very curious to see, even though he's on the third line and the Lightning, as well as other teams, really look for guys that could do pretty much everything um, on both sides of the ice on the third line. I'm very curious where he's going to lean towards in terms of contributions for this team. And what I mean is, yeah, you have your scorers and then you have your facilitators, and that's all good and great. But at the end of the day, as we've seen in years past, the third line is really the pot stirrer, is really the line that gets things going for this Tampa Bay team, especially when they're struggling. And mark my words, they will have their struggles, as we are fully aware of, and we'll definitely see more of that in this upcoming season. Because if it's one thing that we could rely on with the Tampa Bay Lightning, is that they are going to have their nights where they're going to play very well and look like one of the best teams in the league. But there's also going to be other nights where they're just not going to be able to get anything done. And they're going to come out really flat against teams that really they should be almost blowing out. And I think that this team, especially with some of the question marks that we will be seeing, especially with this third line, with Nick Paul, can he be the guy? Can he be the guy that could score? A guy that can consistently win faceoffs while getting things going, scoring wise. Can he help guys like Michael Esamont, who had a very good stretch with the Lightning after coming over via trade, playing pretty well in that series against the Toronto Maple Leafs? And can he also help Tanner Jeannot kind of get things going? Because as we all know, and we'll get into that with the player preview when we get to Tanner Jeannot, but can he kind of be that guy that could wrangle everybody in, like what we saw with the third line in years past with Yanni Gourde, Blake Coleman, Cirelli in past years as well? Can he be that guy that could kind of make everybody around him better, but also be the leader on that line? And that's going to be a big question mark for Paul. And really right now, I know it's September 19th. We still got a long ways to go. Right now, we're in the midst of Tampa Bay rookies training camp, and they've been playing well. But when we get to October 10th, opening night, what kind of player will we see donning the 20 jersey? Now, obviously, this is going to be an evolution of Nick Paul as the season goes on. But at the same time, I expect kind of at least my way too early to throw down expectations for him is that we know with the second line. Let me preface what my expectations are by saying this. Is with the second line, as for the time being, unless the Lightning bring in somebody who could help, or if a forward overperforms, whether that be Jeannot, Essamont, or even Paul himself, or someone underperforms like Sherry, Sorelli, or Hagel, which I don't expect any of those guys to do. And we've spoken about probably to exhaustion over the course of the summer how really I think that Hagel should be on the first line, Stamkos should be on the second line, or even on the third line at this point in his career. And I still believe that how Stamkos plays this year is really going to dictate what the lines are going to look like from 1 to 3. But I think that we could at least confidently say at this point in time that Nick Paul does have the ability to contend for that second line forward position. Now, whether that be down the center position, which if that's the case, if he is even in the conversation to contend to play center on the second line forward position, then something is off, because this is the year where Anthony Sorelli, if we haven't already considered him, especially what he did last year with such a short amount of time, if we're having the conversation at any point in time that Sorelli is not the guy on the second line, most likely it's because he's either hurt or he's just a ghost out there. And that's the case. That's not a good thing for this Lightning team. If we're having the conversation at any point in time that Nick Paul is contending for the second line center position, that's a problem. But at the same time, if he's going to be thrown out on the wing, then that's great news. I know it might be a little bit of a give and take in terms of, a lot of chips falling in certain positions for Nick Paul to play on that second line. I think that really, I really think that the easy decision, and what I mean by that is Stamkos not being on the first line. I think that that's a decision that's inevitably going to be made at some point. I call it easy because we all know kind of from what we saw last year, where this is going to go if you watch this team on a nightly basis. But at the same time, it's also frustrating. And at the same time, I know Jon Cooper, as we all know, can get into the mode of not wanting to change things, but at the same time, changing a lot of other things. So we'll see with that. But I really think that this year, Nick Paul is going to take that next step. I think that he is going to be on the second line, but it's more so going to be because of Stamkos underperforming and forcing Jon Cooper's hand to maybe move him down a line or two. And I think also at the same time, we'll talk about this when we get to Essamont and Jeannot. I think that Stamkos being on that third line is really going to benefit those guys, because you have a veteran like that who is the best player in franchise history, years of hockey experience and knowledge, playing on a third line with two guys that are still very much in the infancy of their careers. You put those three guys together, you'll see an uptick in performance for at least Jeannot and Essamont, in my opinion. But with Nick Paul, I think that he's such a savvy player to where he could play on any line, and he will definitely get some playing time with that second line, because I think at certain points, especially early on in the season, Jon Cooper is going to want to put Paul with Sorelli and Hagel just because they know each other a lot better. And mind you all, if you're wondering where I'm just getting all these lines from, I'm going from the projections that are on dailyfaceoff.com. So if you want to look at those line combos, definitely very accurate. Definitely something that, when you look at all these players and how they fit, I think that, and especially with the way Cooper likes to move things around, I think Paul really will gel well with Sorelli and Hagel, especially in tough situations throughout the game. Sherry, I would not be surprised if he gets moved down to the third. Now that kind of leaves it wide open who's going to be that guy down the middle. Most likely Essamont, but I'm not going to throw too much faith into that combination as well. But Yeah, I think Nick Paul is one of those guys where you look at him and where he fits into this team, and what Jon Cooper's plans for him potentially could be for this season. I think it really depends on the rest of the team. I think that you throw him into any situation, he's going to succeed. I would just like preferably to see more scoring out of him, because the Lightning are definitely going to need it. They're definitely going to need him to come up big. They're definitely going to need him to score in big time spots. And I think that that's going to result in you seeing that game winning goals number going from 4, like we saw last year, to probably a number like maybe 8 or 9, even 10, because I think he plays a huge role with this team. And I think you're going to see him in his second full season with his Tampa Bay team. You're going to start to see him more integrated and more kind of all over the place with this Tampa Bay team as they try to get back to the playoffs and make another deep run towards another Stanley Cup. So we'll continue this conversation coming up. What kind of season are we expecting? Numbers wise, is he going to lean, like I said, is he going to lean towards more scoring? Is he going to lean towards more facilitating the puck? What kind of numbers are we going to see for Nick Paul in his second full season with the Tampa Bay Lightning? But first, I want to talk about one of our sponsors today, and that is our friends over at Jase Medical. Now, everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you are not hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical make sure you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy, medication delivery, and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught and unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, promo code LOCKEDON. So once again, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. We're available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on Sirius XM this year. You could download our podcast on there as well. So don't forget to do that on the Sirius XM app. And as always, go ahead and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We hit the 700 subscriptions mark. Like I said, as we get ever closer to that 1,000 subscribers mark, we will provide, once we do that, we will provide more information on our sweepstakes surrounding a giveaway. So as long as you're subscribed, you are automatically entered into that. So go ahead and do that. And you can follow me on Twitter, or formerly known as, or formerly known as Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days, at DankyDank, DENKYDANK. Love hearing from all of you. If you want to throw me a question in my DMs about how I feel about this player or that player, or what kind of season we're going to have, I will answer all those questions eventually as we get ever closer to the upcoming 23-24 season. But right now we are previewing Nick Paul, his upcoming season, second full year with the Tampa Bay Lightning after coming over via trade at the deadline, having an incredible year to start off, and has only gotten better as he's played more and more games, and really, in my opinion, a cornerstone of this Tampa Bay Lightning team, because you have your foundation in Point, Hagel, Vasilevsky, Kucherov. If you still want to throw Stamkos into that equation, that's great. And we'll talk about that when we get to Steven Stamkos. Not fully buying into him being kind of a big cog in the machine. I think he's going to be more of a supporting cast player, and we will be talking about him on the next episode, previewing his upcoming season. So you definitely don't want to miss out on that. But right now we're talking about Nick Paul. And just to refresh everybody's memories, had a very good year last year, 80 games played, 17 goals scored, 32 points. And I think he's only going to get better. I think that, though, as much as I want to go out there and say that I think he could score 35 goals, most likely isn't going to happen. I think he's got the talent to kind of get there, but being on the third line, being with Tanner Jeannot and Mikey Esamont, probably not going to happen. I think that if he gets moved up to the second line at some point, I mean, permanently, because he will get a lot of ice time this season with Cirelli and Hagel and other players as well. I think really right now we got to ask ourselves, is he a 20 goal scorer? And what I mean is, yes, he has the potential to score 20 goals. Absolutely. Can he hit that this year, ideally on the third line? And the answer is yes. I think that he's a very smart player. I think that he is fully aware, because when you look at him play on the ice and he skates around even without the puck, he is a player that I think we could fully agree that he is fully aware of what he could do in this situation, in that situation. And you could just tell by his body language that he he may not be the flashiest guy. He may not be the fastest guy on the ice. He may not have a wrister that he could rip off past the goaltender from 10 feet away. But he's smart. He's very good at positioning himself on the ice. Kind of not at the level of Kucherov, but to where he knows where he needs to be in order to make his teammates successful, to make himself successful, to put them and himself in the best position to score a goal. And on the other side ice as well, when to be physical, when to get into the passing lane, when to get in the shooting lane, what to do in this situation, that situation. And I think when you have a player like that, that makes you very dangerous, especially in this NHL where it's all flash, where it's all scoring, scoring, scoring. Playing like that and be able to turn the game on a dime when you're in the defensive zone and you need to make a stop and then get going really quick down the other side of the ice. I think that will set you up, as we've seen in years past with guys like Point and Kucherov. When you have guys like that I believe, in my opinion, is more valuable than a guy who could rip off fireballs from the edge of his stick. I think that really he's going to set himself up for a lot of opportunities. And the only question is, and we really can't concretely answer this right now, but we'll see it as the season progresses and goes on. Can he capitalize on those situations? And I firmly believe he can. I firmly believe that he will be a 20 goal scorer. As for points, I think that 40, 45 tops that's where we'll see him this year. I think that we will see him get more power play time than we have seen in years past with him, obviously, because with certain players exiting the organization, I think that he is going to be a vital part. He is going to be playing down the middle on that second power play unit. I think that really, though, at the end of the day, it really depends on what also he's got around him. He's a kind of player, as what we've seen with players that come to this organization. They may not be a name that a lot of people really know. And when you look at what he's done in Ottawa as opposed to coming here, it's not a bad thing. He is a product of what he's had around him. And he is in a situation where he's best able to use his skills without going too overboard and sacrificing other elements of his play. He was unable to do that in Ottawa because he didn't have a good team around him. Whereas now here in Tampa Bay, he's got probably 4 guys off the top of my head that are all-stars or should be all-stars, even though they don't select that many from each team. So I think at the end of the day, as much as we want to sit here and almost wishfully think that, yes, Nick Paul can and should be a 20-goal scorer with a 45-point season, it's really dependent on what situations he is put in. Can he capitalize on opportunities that are given to him throughout the course of the season? And I fully believe, as I just stated, him being able to play the game in such a smart way where he gives himself opportunities, he is going to succeed. And when Nick Paul succeeds, as we have seen in past games, this Lightning team succeeds. So we'll keep an eye on that. And hopefully, not only can he reach those expectations that we have for him, but also surpass them and possibly catapult this team and almost carry them like what we saw with him a couple of years ago in the playoffs. So we will wrap things up in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about our last sponsor of the day, and that's our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, in case you haven't heard, FanDuel Sportsbook is America's #1 sportsbook right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, then there's no better place to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon as the NFL season is already underway. The Buccaneers are playing very good football right now, and you definitely don't want to miss out on bets for them as they continue to try to get back to the playoffs, as well as throwing some of those prop bets for the Tampa Bay Lightning in the upcoming season. So visit FanDuel.com and include money lines, bet props, etc., or any team, and go to FanDuel.com, like I said, /lockedon, kick off the NFL season. So wrapping things up, as always, want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. I think that Nick Paul is going to be fine this year. As much as we could worry, a lot of question marks, as always, surrounding this Tampa Bay Lightning team. Can this player, not only this team, play better than what we saw last year? Because really, other than I believe it was the month of January, this team was really just teetering on mediocrity. And that might sound a little harsh, but it may not look so much. It may not look like that when you look at the season as a whole. You may not look at it even when you look at the scores. But if you watched all those games and you watched almost every shift, you know what I'm talking about. And I think that really, as we go throughout these player previews, you are going to hear more and more me discuss how really it's, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to Jon Cooper to really, these players go out, they can play well, they can play bad. But as the coach, Jon Cooper is really going to need to guide these guys. And whether that be making decisions that are not popular or popular, that's his job. He's going to have to make the tough decisions. And I think that players like Nick Paul make his life difficult and easy, because Nick Paul, guy who could do a little bit of everything, throw him on the third line, solid, no questions asked, no problem. At the same time, if he overperforms, then you got an issue on your hands, especially if you have guys on the higher lines not really performing up to standards. And, what do you do there? Do you throw up the hot hand, or do you sit on your veterans? Something that we saw almost too much of last year. A lot of people like to say fatigue, but listen, at the end of the day, see other teams performing, may not have played as many games as Lightning have played over the last 5 years, But at the same time, professionals, they go out there, they get paid to do a certain job. You got to leave it all on the line every night. And after a certain period of time, you can't really use fatigue as an excuse, especially when you're constantly bringing in players that have not played as many previous games as maybe some of the other players on this team. So, like I said, on the next episode, we'll be having our discussion. It's going to be an interesting episode because I think a lot of people will have a lot of different things and emotions to display about our preview of Steven Stamkos. So you definitely don't want to miss out on that. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.